I want to begin this video establishing that I'm making this for the purpose of constructive criticism. I'm someone who went into this series wanting it to be good and wanting it to succeed, and for the most part it's absolutely done those things. But the second season has really outlined some clear issues with the show as a whole now that it's slowed down, and the setting has settled. This is in fact issue 1. The first season established a certain flow and pace that the second simply cannot keep up with. We've gone from covering decades of time to what I think is about a month or two in the second season. It's such a different feel, and not even a negative one necessarily, but it almost feels like a different show. The conflict is so much tighter this season, and it honestly feels almost narrow despite the size of the world. Season 1 had sort of a different conflict each episode, with the overarching through line of the greater conflict. Season 2 feels far too much to me like we're flipping between two rooms of people talking. One thing the early seasons of Thrones did well was show us multiple perspectives and multiple ongoing stories, which let us always have something to actively engage with. If another story had slowed down for now, someone somewhere else would usually be up to something. In House of the Dragon, it's basically just focused on this one war between two sides. I think this causes quite a few issues with the pacing and even the tension, because we're constantly seeing both sides and their thoughts and opinions. When one side is plotting something, there's not much surprise or intrigue because we know exactly what they've been discussing. We see both sides of the conflict and we see them pretty much always. It leads to the feeling that we're just watching the same scene over and over because many of the scenes on each side are the same groups of people sitting down at a table and discussing the same war. This makes the plot feel like it's stagnating quite a lot, even when it is just putting in the work to build up to a big payoff. It just all feels a bit too repetitive. Next, and what I think is the biggest issue, is the distribution of scenes and development of secondary characters. I'm really bothered by the fact that we didn't get more scenes with Aegon before what will inevitably be a good while of him laying in bed now and not getting much to do. This is partly down to the 8-episode run, but also because the scene distribution and character focus is just not the best. Aegon even got enough scenes, but many characters barely have any. Even a character as important as Aemond has like 2 scenes focused on him before Rook's Rest and his regency. We need more scenes for Helena, Aemond, Jace, Baelor, Rhaena, and also basically every dragon, which are characters too. As an aside, and an important one at that, where are my dragons? This is Dragon Show TM, but it feels so rare to see a dragon when it isn't directly part of a battle or belonging to Rhaenyra, Daemon, or Aemond. It's so sad that the first proper scene we got of Sunfire was about 10 seconds long. Despite this, it was a banger scene too, where we saw the relationship between Aegon and Sunfire. I get the budget has to be considered, but equally consider that dragons are an important part of the show, and the identity of many of these characters. It'd be so nice to see these dragons that are basically solely mentioned by name, like Helena's Dreamfire. We've barely seen Dreamfire at all in the whole series aside a few scenes. I imagine most of the people watching the show aren't even aware Helena has a dragon until it's explicitly mentioned by Aemond to Helena in the finale. How would they? We never see it really. Which brings me back to the characters. Some we have not even seen, such as Viserys' third son, Daeron, who also has a dragon by the way. We don't see him until the very end, and it's not even clear if it's him and Tessarion. What I wish would have happened here is that focus would be lifted away from Rhaenyra, Alicent, and Daemon in particular. These three are the biggest offenders, I think, of scenes that are way too repetitive and time-consuming. Daemon's Harrenhal Weirwood dreams are interesting, but they could reasonably be condensed down to an episode or two. Rhaenyra's scenes feel frustrating to me, not necessarily because of their subject, but more that she gets so much time often repeating the same points. I can't fly out into battle because my council won't let me, but my council criticize me if I don't do anything. It feels like that over and over. Alicent is a character who gets so much screen time despite the fact that she's barely relevant to the plot now, especially by the mid-season when she's no longer on the small council and she's spoken with Rhaenyra about what happened. At that point she could reasonably fade out for a while, I think, like Otto has previously when he was no longer Hand. She isn't relevant to what's happening, and there's more interesting things happening and characters who direly need that screen time. Removing many of these scenes would also make the character more engaging. I'd be far more excited to see her on screen if it had been a few episodes, much like with Otto when he's gone for a while. It's far more interesting instead of having scenes focusing on her doing very little aside moping around the Red Keep. The time taken away from them could be used on developing the other characters. Reyna could maybe use some more characterization aside her lack of dragon, which she now has, presumably. What is her character now? The one conflict she had was no dragon, now she presumably has one. So what happens now with her? Characters like Jace, Baylor, Aemond, and Helena have the basis for great characters, but they just aren't given enough time to develop or given the focus really to become something great, because we apparently need another scene of Alicent looking sad about the fact that she misheard Viserys. Even though the entire war would have happened regardless of this. Even characters like Corlys has barely had anything to do this season aside sit at a dock and approach various people. It's genuinely 90% of his scenes. The new generation especially needs their relationships developed and fleshed out further. Give them a similar time you gave to the previous generation in season 1. Develop them as people we care about with clear motives and goals and relationships and opinions. The final main issue to me, and one that is the most critical as it feels reminiscent of Late Thrones, is just how some scenes are treated. We had a scene where Adam is found by Seasmoke and they presumably bonded, but like we cut away before we even see the interaction. I would really love to see how Adam reacted there. This is a huge moment in this universe, and it's made clear by the characters. It's also just a huge moment in Adam's life. We should see it happen. It worries me that their plans are the same for Reyna next season with Sheepstealer. Are they going to just cut to her having Sheepstealer claimed at the start of season 3? Because that would suck, especially after we saw how arduous a process claiming the dragons were in episode 7. As mentioned before, the dragons are characters too. They need to be given proper scenes and show emotion and connection to the person they're allowing to write them. It reminds me of Late Thrones and moments like Jon revealing his parentage to the other Starks, only for it to cut away when he's talking about it. We want to see that. At the start of season 2, we get no discussion or direct scene where Aemond has to explain the death of Luke. It just skips it. This huge deal and one of many points of no return for the war, Rhaenyra's child and heir to Driftmark was killed by a Green, and we don't even see the characters discuss it. We just get a scene referring to them discussing it earlier. Can we see the original seed? It'd be a lot more interesting than a discussion of the discussion. What did Aemond say when he returned? How did he spin the story? How did the characters react when he told them? This stuff is way more interesting to see. It's sort of bizarre to skip this easy moment of tension and drama. In terms of Lucerys' death as well, we barely get any scenes covering the feelings of people after characters die. Luke's death is mourned in about an episode. Jaehaerys' death is mourned for about an episode also. Rhaenys' death is mourned for about an episode. Then the characters sort of just move on. Some characters don't even really react. It feels like so many of the significant deaths are just done with once the following episode is over. We can take this to an even greater extent with characters from season 1 like Laenor. Corlys and Rhaenys still haven't really properly discussed the death of their son with Rhaenyra, who they believe killed him. It's sort of crazy. Corlys just doesn't mention this the whole time, despite the fact that he must be thinking it, surely. That thread just isn't tied up. Laenor isn't even mentioned at all, in fact, despite the fact that someone's claimed Seasmoke. If we're meant to infer something, it's definitely not very clear, which is another issue, so but I wish sometimes they would just have the characters talk. There's so many scenes in this season where the characters are silent and reflective, and we're meant to get a general idea of what they're thinking, but sometimes it's also just nice to have the characters say what they think. Have them actually talk about their feelings, you know? Sure, it's good to show not tell, but sometimes it is good to just tell. Have the characters just discuss their feelings outright. The other issue arising is just scenes that do not flow properly from what was originally established. Scenes like the head of Meleys being paraded through the streets, the dragon that previously caused the deaths of what was likely hundreds of small folk, and yet no one even bothers to mention this fact. The rat catchers were this huge big deal done by Aegon, yet Rhaenys slaughtering hundreds brutally with her dragon is just sort of forgotten, it seems. All of these various things are small at first, but they're slowly creeping in more and more, and it's just a bit worrying. The final way they're doing this is through strange scenes occurring, scenes where it feels like the writers are jumping ahead of time because they're impatient. Did we need 2 scenes this season of Alicent and Rhaenyra meeting? Because I think we didn't even need 1. What would have been a really interesting reunion if they were to ever meet again in the future, after the war is over or something, will now be really shallow because they saw each other multiple times during the war. It just weakens the series theories and even the tension. Instead of not knowing how the other is feeling, they frequently meet for a chat and to discuss what's happening. And of course, that whole scene and Alicent's goals and intentions are just bizarre. I don't know what to say about that. I think everyone knows that's silly. So the ending of this series was also a huge disappointment. It felt like a trailer for the third season. Debatably, this entire season just felt like a setup for the next, which is a little disappointing. Season 1's ending felt like we were about to be thrown into an active conflict, yet we spent the majority of this season in the same two rooms, discussing the same things, with one major on-screen battle being Rook's Rest. I don't think it's enough. I'm not sure if this was a budget issue or what because of the dragons, but this war is going to feel incredibly slow if we can only get a battle every season. Maybe dragons are just that expensive, because as mentioned before, there's some we just straight up don't see, like Dreamfire, and it's almost explained away as, oh well, Helena just doesn't ride. It's like, really? It's a shame. It's one thing to take things slow, but it's another thing for it to be this slow. It's too slow, I think. At least for this point in the war when it feels like things should be happening. It would be fine even if there was a relative payoff in the finale, but there's nothing. It feels like 2 more episodes are missing at the end of the season. Why are there not another few on there? A battle episode maybe, and then a reflective aftermath one where the characters prepare for season 3. The ending here falls incredibly flat, with a montage of conflicts I wish were explored more in the season itself, rather than being set up for the end. That's my thoughts. Let me know yours too, down below. Thanks for watching.